Good morning once again. So have any of you ever bought a car and then gone out in your car and thought everybody else had the exact same car, that you never noticed that before? Well, I think that same kind of phenomenon has been happening each time I come up with a topic for the month. And so this month's topic has been caring for others, compassion, and all of a sudden I have all these opportunities to practice what I preach. And some of those opportunities have been quite a challenge. And yet it's been another example for me that what we focus on, we get. And we get that opportunity. So a couple weeks ago, I talked about the meta prayer, and I gave everybody a copy so we could start practicing that. So I'm hoping that that's helping you to expand your heart space a little this month as we continue to look at how we bring loving kindness into our lives. And then Lillian last week talked about living in meta, or out on a limb, L-I-M, living in meta, that meta again being loving kindness. And so this week, the other aspect of what I talked about a couple weeks ago that I want to continue with is that idea that we start out with whatever it is we see out there, whatever circumstance shows up, and we feel it needs more compassion. If we believe there's suffering taking place and we want to help alleviate it, the first thing we do is take that into prayer. We take that into our prayerful space. Anything that looks like lack or limitation, or like I said, suffering, we move first into prayer. So you can use the affirmative prayer that we talked about, that we teach here, or you can use your meta prayer. But both of those will start with aligning the self first. So any quiet time and downtime and prayerful time that we spend in self-care is the first step. That's the first place. And out of that, then we can move. So we talked about those first three steps a couple of weeks ago. The first one being recognition. What is God? What is spirit? What is the universe? Seeing and recognizing that. Then unifying ourselves with that. And from there, moving into that place where we're more open and able to listen to how it is Spirit's ready to show up in our life. We start to see the vision of that condition we're taking into prayer changed. And so someone said, but you didn't finish, so there's two more steps, right? So yes, after we do that, we move into Thanksgiving. And the reason we can move into Thanksgiving is because once we get that picture and we align with Spirit to bring that about, we know it's already so in the mind of God. So we can give thanks in advance of its manifestation, because it's that attitude of gratitude, so to speak, that continues to help drawing it into us. And once we're done giving thanks, then we release. And at that point, once we've released the prayer, in other words, we've released our words, knowing that the universe is ready to act, we're ready to act. That's the key. We're ready to move our feet. We're ready to go into that compassionate action. And so once we establish that, we can figure out what direction we want to go. So a couple of weeks ago when I talked about this originally, there was a gentleman visiting here for the first time, and we sat together at lunch, and he shared with me what he believed, how it is that Spirit worked. And he's very in alignment, and it was a good reminder for me. He said, I believe that it's once we move our feet that the universe sees we're truly committed. And that's when it conspires to support us. That's when it starts to really rush through in our lives and manifest. And so for me, that was a great reminder. Yes, we do all that inner work, but it's that moving our feet, taking a step, moving into action, that's when we show that we're ready, we're willing, and we're committed. That's when Spirit can move through us in that form of God activity or love activity in the world. Marianne Williamson is who Teresa read from this morning, her book, Everyday Grace. And in there she says, love is literally the power of God alive on earth. I loved that. She also said, love is a process as well as a goal. And I also like that. You know, sometimes we think we want to create this world out here, that world that works for everyone. We want to see a world full of love. But the process to get there is also love. It's bringing love into everything that we do. So love is the process as well as the goal. And then Ernest Holmes says, God's nature is love, and God's nature is love and to give. He also says love is the divine givingness. So as we consider looking at how it is we want to alleviate suffering, as we're talking about compassion this month, what is the role of giving in that movement, that moving our feet as we move forward? How does that look? First of all, I think it's important when we give that we give as an act of compassion and we give free and clear. And what I mean by that is, if we give to the point where we move into resentment, we've just created more suffering. We've created suffering for ourselves and for the person who feels that resentment on some level coming out of us as we are technically giving. If we give with an expectation of getting something in return, that's really a loan, right? That's not free and clear. And if we give with the idea that this is an exchange for something else that we're going to get back, that's more like an agreement or a contract. And those kind of things should be established up front. So before I give you this, I'm expecting this, and that's an agreement. That's different than giving in the sense of free and clear. And I think that's different than the type of giving we're talking about when we say that God's nature is the givingness and that moves through us. So again, when we seek to give to alleviate suffering, we're doing it in a way that we're free and clear. We're giving 100% without any expectation back. So I see more people fanning than not at this point. Can we kick that up one more? So thank you. It was interesting on Mother's Day. I was sitting in my study in a different chair than I normally sit in, trying to get my printer to work. And I saw this little book, and I thought, well, what is that? Well, it turned out to be a book that my mother had written in on Mother's Day. Isn't that sweet? She started it in 2007. She passed in 2009. And the very first page I opened to said this: "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." And she explains in here that that's the golden rule, and that Dale Carnegie wrote about it in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This entire book that she wrote in, all her little notes, are related to building friendships. But then she added at the bottom of this page, George Bernard Shaw, a noted writer, said, "Don't do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Their tastes may be different." So, when we're thinking about giving and helping others and being of service, I think it's important that we ask the person that we perceive as needing our help, how can I help you? Do you really want help? And if so, what can I do to help you? And then I think that question that we've asked here before many times, what do you really want? To keep asking that till we get to the basis of what would really be something that would be helpful and true giving, as opposed to maybe what we think they should have. So when I went and visited my friend in March, when I went for the memorial, my friend Crayola, who got me out there, gave me a book that was written by her cousin. And this book is called We Love You, But You're Going to Hell. Christians and homosexuality, agree, disagree, take a look. This is written by her cousin, Dr. Kim O'Reilly. And so when I first read it, I saw the cover, I'm like, ooh. But she handed it to me, I started reading it, and it's very interesting. It's her path. Christianity is very important to her. It's in her family. Her father was a minister. She grew up in a community that was strongly Christian identified. And so it was very difficult for her when she eventually came out, and she struggled with what's going on in her life and how does she bring these two aspects together. And so in this book, what she's done is looked at the way Scripture has been used in culture and in society. And she's making a case for the fact that we can use Scripture to sort of support whatever it is we'd like to support. And so one of the examples she gave is the reason I'm sharing this with you. She showed how Scripture had been used for the early slave owners to justify what they were doing as long as they treated their slaves well, and it says lovingly and fatherly, then it was okay. This supported them in that idea, and they felt like they were doing them a favor. So I thought about that in terms of giving. I know that's a radical, sort of extreme historical example, but when we think that we know what's best for other people, and so we assume that what we give them is going to be for their best interest, I had to think, if they had ever asked the people that they were helping by taking care of them, even though they were their slaves, what do you really want? I could imagine that the majority, if not all, would have said freedom and self-determination. And so I think it's important that we remember that when we consider compassionate action, that we consider giving, that we check in with the person that we are feeling we want to give to, or the group that we feel we want to give to, and collaborate with them. Figure out what it is they really want and make sure that we're not trying to give something that's rationalizing getting what we really want in the name of giving. That kind of misgiving occurs when we see ourselves as separate from other groups of people, whether we see ourselves as better than, more educated, wiser, or in this case, there was also the idea that they were more connected, more chosen by God than, say, another group of people. So as we continue to see ourselves equal with God, and then one with all the expressions of God, we regain our senses, so to speak. We come back into that alignment with the truth of our being. And Albert Einstein said, and this is Marianne Williamson quoted him in the front of her book, "A human being is a part of the whole called the universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion." And I love that sentence. That's why I named this talk after that. Widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in all its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. That was another piece that I really liked about what he said there, is that as we widen our sphere of compassion, our circle of compassion, and include more people in that circle of compassion, it's not only helping them, but it's contributing to our own inner sense of security. It's helping us as well. I have a friend that I made at UNM who was originally from India and is now living in India again. And she posted recently on Facebook in response to some of the political things that are going on over there. And she said, "Some years back, after enough political wanderings, I learned about restorative justice, about how we move forward as a community, providing all the opportunity to reintegrate into the social fabric." And then she equates that concept to what happens in our personal lives when we push someone out of our social network, and how it is that we might be able to reintegrate them into our lives. She said, "I thought some of us have to keep channels open, keep spaces ready for friendships and meals together, ensure in our public and private life we do not mock, humiliate each other, that we keep steady a light for others to find." And further on, she says, "I keep reminding myself there are so many aspects to a situation, and to keep others as humans, not labels and slurs. Humans beyond their political opinions, with a myriad of life experiences and many emotions." And then she says this, and this is the part I thought was really telling. And then sometimes I think I should cast myself on one side and forget these bridges. It is so easy to call names and post links in favor of your beliefs, to find evidence to suit your conclusion, read histories as you want, and create stories of the other. But I have chosen a tougher path, to stay in uncertain spaces, knowing not and being okay with that. I think there are many like me. I think we are the lighthouses for the world. And so again, if you think about what she's saying there, this idea that we cast people out of our circles, whether it's our social circles, whether it's our interpersonal life or beyond, and how it is we might widen that circle of compassion and at least leave a light on, so should someone want to re-enter, they can find their way back. And to be that lighthouse for people where we're not creating separation, but keeping those bridges going no matter what. So compassion and alleviating suffering is not about taking over someone else's life. It's not about rearranging their circumstances against their will or without their participation. And it's not about loving them only if they do what we think they should do or do it our way. Again, I'm just really loving this book, so you're getting a lot of Marianne today. In here she says, ministry is not just for ministers, so I want you all to hear that. In the new spirituality, a minister is anyone who chooses to use our resources to tend to the wounded heart of the world. Anything we do can be a ministry, from a menial labor to the highest professional endeavor. It is our ministry if it is an activity we use to spread peace and forgiveness and love. We transform our work into a sacred experience by transforming our sense of this purpose from that of serving our own needs as we define them to that of serving the work of God. This shift in purpose from a focus on ourselves to a focus on God's love, and that really spoke to me. Again, not just what I think and want, but keeping that focus on God's love activates a chain of miracles. For any time we walk into a situation with a higher sense of why we are there, we are bringing down the light, or as Bhavna said, being a lighthouse for others. So I believe the key to compassionate action is starting off with building relationships. Seeing the person in each person that we perceive might need our help or that we want to go and serve in some way, and seeing the God within them, creating those connections so that we collaborate with them and we walk with these people, whoever they might be, as they discover their wholeness and the truth of who they are. And so this past week, there were a few of us, Teresa and Ariel and I went to the Aggie Cupboard. And I think some of you will remember that we tithed to the Aggie Cupboard last month. And the Aggie Cupboard is a place on campus. It's a pantry that provides food for staff, faculty, and students who are experiencing what they refer to as food insecurity. Yeah, it's a different term. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because when we went to that training, the woman who is in charge of the whole program did an amazing job of reminding us to see the real and whole person in anyone who comes through the door. She has structures in place so that everyone is made to feel as comfortable as possible. They're made to experience their time there as comfortably as possible and with as least amount of judgment. She doesn't want us judging whoever comes for food, so much so that they don't even have to prove they need it. If they walk through the door and say they need it, that's all, and they're treated like everyone else. And she has an amazing philosophy that just permeates out into how that whole process takes place there. And one of the things that they do is bring in a mobile food pantry once a month. And normally that is the last Tuesday of the month, but this month it's going to be the last Wednesday on May 29th. a truck with fresh food this time. So they can normally only give out non-perishable food. But this truck is bringing 40,000 pounds of food to be handed out. And each month they have a truck that does this, and they need people to help unload the trucks, pass out the food, and break down the cardboard boxes that bring the food. So one of the things I created quite a while ago is a Connect Up sheet. And we have them out in the social hall, and I'm encouraging all of us, as we feel called to be of service, create a Connect Up sheet and see who else in this community might feel called to do the same thing and join you. So this is a Connect Up sheet to help on May 29th distribute the food. They need quite a few people to process, as you can imagine, 40,000 pounds of food. And so we will meet here at 11, make our way over there to the university by 11:30, and do what we are instructed to do, however we can step up. So this will be out in the social hall, but I wanted to show you this to encourage you to find your own way that you feel called to serve, and we'll create more of these opportunities for each other to work together. Now, I know that some people can be concerned when we seek to alleviate suffering that we might be enabling dependence, that somehow we're not supporting the God self in that person that truly is abundant and has everything that they need. And we often have that story that we say the difference between giving someone a fish or teaching someone to fish. And so again, what I'm suggesting is that each one of us take these concerns into prayer and see where we feel called to step forward. Because one of the things that we've discovered in the last several months, as we've heard the different speakers from up here, is that we probably all agree on the what. I think everyone agrees we would like to see people not hungry. We would like to see people fed. We would like to see that people don't experience food insecurity. Where we have differences is how we think we should go about creating that potentiality in the world. And so what I would like to suggest is that if I feel called to do this and you're called to do that, it's all okay. And again, our practice is not to judge each other in how we each feel called to serve, but rather to recognize that all together, as we're all being called in different ways to go out there and spread and expand our compassionate realm, that each way that we are called is good and is right. And so it made me think about Maslow's hierarchy of need. I imagine most of you are familiar with that big pyramid that you've seen probably. And Maslow's idea was that in order to reach self-actualization, you have to have these things underneath as stepping stones in place before you can be freed up to do the inner work that is required for that. So the very basis of that pyramid is psychological or physiological, food and water. That people need that first. The next layer is safety and shelter. The next layer is love or a sense of belonging. The next layer is esteem, self-esteem. And then the top layer then is where you can move into self-actualization. So what I started to think about when I thought about that and what we're talking about this month is how each one of those layers are places that we might be called to provide compassionate action. We might be called to provide the fish so that they're not hungry and they can focus on the person who is teaching them at another layer how to fish. And to build that self-esteem is a different layer where that could be worked on so that they feel they even deserve a fish to begin with. So it's a cycle that moves back and forth. Instead of seeing it as a stagnant, we have to do this and then this and then this. But each one of us could be called to meet the need of a different part of that layer. And all together, we're going to create a more whole experience for whoever it is or whatever group of people we're trying to serve. So this reminded me of a situation when I was in Albuquerque. I had very briefly gotten there around 1993, I think this took place, 93 or 94. I was working for the Community Services for the Deaf, and about 3,000 Cuban refugees were brought into Albuquerque, and of those 3,000, 13 were deaf. So they reached out to our services to help provide services to the 13 deaf Cubans that showed up. And as you can imagine, they came needing a lot of things. They were setting them up in apartments or in hotels, but they needed clothes, they needed things, appliances or things to put into their apartment. They also needed to learn about the US dollar and how it worked, and how to read what prices were, and how to know that they were giving the right amount or getting the right amount of change back. They also needed to learn English so they could read what was on the signs around them, and they needed to learn American Sign Language. They signed in Cuban Sign Language, and they read and spoke. If they talked, some of them were hard of hearing, they used Spanish. So what was unique for us, though, is that this group of people had a lot of pride, good pride. They believed that they were coming here to a place where they could work and send money home to support their families and help back at home. They did not want handouts. We had a lot of people who had given to our center there a lot of, clothes and appliances and all kinds of things, and they were like, we don't want to take free handouts. They didn't want that. So we had to get creative. We created a store in our conference room, and we put prices on all these different things that people had brought. And we came up with some money that looked like U.S. money so they could actually learn, and each one of them got a certain amount. And we had a workshop so they could learn English and the words that went with all of these things, so they could learn about the money and how it worked. And we had people stationed so that we would give change and work with them to see how that worked. And of course, when all was said and done, everything they bought, they got to take home. This worked. It was a way to bring about in them a sense of pride. They were learning something. We were having fun together. It was like being in a class instead of just showing up and us handing them a bunch of stuff. And so to me, again, that was a real lesson in how it is when we are being compassionate and serving that we look at all of those needs on that hierarchy. I don't know if you are all aware, many of you probably are, that we have a global vision for the Centers for Spiritual Living. We called this the Global Heart Vision. There are 10 aspects to this, and I'm not going to read them all, but if you want to see them all, you can see it after the service. The 6th one says, we envision a world where each and every person has enough food, a home, and a sense of belonging, a world of peace and harmony, enfranchisement, and justice. The 8th one says, we envision a worldwide culture in which forgiveness, whether for errors, injustices, or debts, is the norm. And the final one you've heard me say many times, we envision a world that works for everyone, and they added now, and for all creation. So that's a new piece to that one. So as we think about compassionate action, consider what traditionally has been compassionate acts: helping others, doing for, saving them, being the hero. And one of the things I started to realize as I studied this way back is that every hero needs a victim in order to be a hero. If we want to be a savior, we need someone that's in a situation where they need to be saved. So can we imagine a world that works for everyone, free from suffering, where we release our attachment to the roles of savior and hero? Where instead our compassion looks like empowerment, collaboration, and jointly creating that world that works for everyone. That takes some visioning, so keep contemplating it, because I think the more of us that can see it, the more it's going to pull it into that reality of what we see in our world. So I'm going to encourage you to consider that if you are able to really and easily care for others, if you find it easy to widen that circle and include others into it, that you consider this month expanding your circle of compassion to include yourself a little more. Some self-care and time with yourself. And if you have become really good at setting boundaries and taking care of yourself and taking the time that you need to do your inner work, and that you've really got that piece together, I encourage you to widen your circle of compassion to include maybe people you haven't thought of before, or maybe someone in your social sphere that you've pushed out in the past or moved out of your heart space, maybe in your family or in your community in some way. The idea is to bring about a balance so that that circle of compassion includes us and includes others. And so sometimes our suffering is because we can no longer do things the way we used to. We suffer when we feel like we've become a burden to somebody else. And so as we think about serving, we don't want to create that feeling in them. We want to make sure that they feel their worth. But we also need to think about if we've moved into that space in our own life, if we started to feel like we really just can't do like we used to. This is what Marianne has to say on that. There are always ways to show greater honor and compassion to all life, to get over ourselves and serve something bigger. We are given as many opportunities to reconstruct the nature of our lives as there are moments in a day. We can think more insightfully. We can love more deeply. We can give more selflessly and serve more faithfully the call of love. I loved that sentence. Serve more faithfully the call of love. And how many times have we shown up lovingly for another person and been told, "Thank you, you're such an angel"? I know someone here who hears that a lot. Angels' wings are not just metaphorical any more than a butterfly's are. They are an actual set of cosmic probabilities increased in the presence of mystical awareness. They are higher thought forms through which we transcend limitations, flying above the earthly fears that would otherwise hold us down. So no matter where we are or what we might experience in terms of changes in what we can do or can't do, we can always love more deeply, and we can always give more selflessly in some arena, even if it's just sitting and listening with someone. So as we consider this process of compassionate action, we don't want to create more suffering. Instead, we want to see God in everyone, empower them, collaborate with them, and work together to see that alleviated. A couple weeks ago, we quoted from Ernest Holmes, "Let us choose to be identified with power, with love and beauty, with peace and happiness. Let us begin by taking every condition that shows up in our world into prayer first. Let us do the inner work to awaken that God nature, that loving, giving nature within us. Let us widen our circles of compassion to include ourselves and to include more others, so to speak." And so to conclude with some other words of Ernest Holmes, our individualized universe is forever complete, yet forever completing itself in order that every experience may teach us to transcend some previous one in ever-ascending cycles upward bound. This is the true meaning of misfortune or vicissitude or suffering, which is never a thing in and of itself. The universe does not demand suffering. Suffering is human-made through ignorance. Someday we shall decide we have had enough suffering. And further on in the text, he says, "To help those in need is indeed a great privilege, but the blind cannot lead the blind. We must awake to the realization that a divine partnership has already been formed between the seen and the unseen." We awaken to that connection that we have with the divine. And so once we've gone into prayer, once we've done that inner work, once we've awakened and envisioned our circle of compassion widening in whatever way it needs to, we give thanks and we release. And when we release, we're releasing our feet to move into action. We're spreading our angels' wings and we're moving more fully into compassion action. And so it is.